Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope everyone is having a wonderful July so far. Glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us. Beginning the broadcast, since last summer, Nebraska's land lease activity for utility-scale solar power has increased. So far, the state's largest solar project spans around 50 acres, but there are proposed projects in the works at 10 times that amount. Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with Extension Educator for Bioenergy, John Hay, to discuss what to consider when leasing land for solar development.
As demand for energy in the United States continues to grow, new solar developments could soon be a familiar sight around the country, and there's considerable interest in utilizing several acres right here in Nebraska. While several solar projects have been put in place around the state so far, many proposed projects could require much more land than some of the installations we've seen thus far.
Well, the interest in utility-scale solar has grown dramatically across the United States, including Nebraska. And what's been built hasn't been a large number of individual projects. There's been a number of small projects at the community scale happen across Nebraska. But as far as utility-scale projects go, only a handful of kind of minor projects have happened, and then the one most recently that's going in between Lincoln and Omaha just got approved, and I expect that there will be more. Now, from an interest standpoint, there is studies being done on tens of thousands of acres for potential solar development here in Nebraska, and that's where, if those acres get developed, that expansion is dramatically larger and becomes a really big deal. And so that's kind of what we're interested in here, is that there's a lot of land being leased and considered for future development. How much of that development will take place, that's yet to be determined. The answer is some of it.
While some landowners may be keen to lease out space for solar development, it's important to understand there are some key factors when it comes to the land selection process of any potential solar developments.
But landowners sometimes might be interested in saying, well, my land could be solar. The challenge we have right now is that typically that process of land selection is driven by the developer. And so the developer is picking out those areas and then approaching those landowners where they want the solar farms. And it doesn't happen very often the other way, where the landowner says, well, I have a piece of property I'd like to lease, and they approach the developer. It's not to say it can't happen that way, but that's not the most common. The most common is it's a developer-driven selection. And a couple of things that they're looking for in general terms, they're looking at a piece of land that is close to a transmission line, close to a substation, and somewhat close to the load that is being used. So, you don't want to be away from a population where there's no electricity being used when we're generating electricity. We want to be reasonably close to a load. So reasonably close to a city or something like that. Or, like I said, with the transmission line, you could be close to the transmission line where we're getting that electricity to that. But just because a piece of property is close to a transmission line doesn't mean that there is capacity on that transmission line to get the electricity to market. A study needs to be done, and the developers are usually paying for that study through the Southwest Power Pool to figure out, is there enough capacity on that line to put that electricity on in that location.
While there are significant tax credits available for solar development, as Nebraska in particular is a public power state, it's essential that solar development be executed by a private entity in order to take full advantage of the current tax incentives.
It's really important with renewable energy in the United States that a private developer develops it because they have access to the tax credit. And so in a state like Nebraska that's a public power state, the public power utilities are not tax-paying entities and don't have access to that tax credit. So when they purchase electricity from a private renewable developer, they're able to take advantage of that tax credit through that private developer. That private developer is willing to at least give a lower cost of energy for the contract because they're able to take advantage of that tax credit. And so it's important that that's a private developer. Private development of any electrical generation in Nebraska was very challenging prior to some law changes in 2007, 2009, 2010. And so only with those changes, renewable energy has been able to develop in the state as a with private ownership, and then most of that electricity is being purchased by the utilities of the state of Nebraska, though there is more and more interest on those purchases being purchased by private companies that want to be known as green or have green energy.
As of now, there's still a 26% tax credit available for solar development, as this could mean savings for our state's electrical providers and some select companies. It's important to note that this is a tax credit that is steadily declining and will expire, and that means there's no time like the present for new development.
And it is important because obviously that 26% lowers the cost of building the system. Thus, they're able to maybe get more profit for that. So it's an important factor in development. The same is true for wind development. The subsidy that they were able to get drove the price of wind-powered electricity down, thus help development. But just like any subsidy, a good subsidy should be there to help get a industry going, and then fade away over time as that industry becomes self-sustainable. And what we're seeing is that it was 30%, now it's 26%. After 2022, it's planned to be 22%, and then 10% after that.
For the time being, it appears utility-scale solar development is here to stay in the Cornhusker State. If you live in an area well-suited for development, you may have to make some decisions on whether or not you're willing to commit to a long-term land lease. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for that, Bill. John also says that it's a good idea to speak with an attorney about how leasing your land for solar could impact your farming operation. We'll have John back next week to discuss that in part 2 of this series. Over to markets now, and last week's acreage report from the USDA showed estimates of almost 93 million acres of corn, which is about 2% higher than in 2020. For cattle producers, a large corn crop and potentially lower feed costs would be welcomed, though that is still far from certain at this point. Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel joined me this week to talk about that and other things making news in the cattle markets.
Well, I think the message here is, we've seen a dramatic increase in grain prices, and I think the message out of this report and going forward is that we're going to continue to experience, relatively high grain prices. I think we're just going to have to contend with that. I don't think we're going to fix it with this next harvest. Obviously, we've still got weather issues that we're watching and so on, but with a good harvest, we probably still have elevated grain prices. If we have weather problems, it could get even more severe.
Yeah, Derrell, and speaking of weather, that's top of mind for lots of folks. Drought still an issue for producers, but also flooding in some spots. How does all of this affect the livestock markets?
The flooding issues probably have less impact on cattle markets. They could have some impact if it's delaying, for example, hay production in some areas. We've had a lot of rain in some parts of Oklahoma, for example, and I know other regions as well that have delayed, some hay harvest in terms of both quantity and very likely in terms of quality. So some of those things could be an issue. I don't think they're probably a major factor for the market going forward. The good news is we have moisture to make forage. That's probably the best news out of this, but the flooding can be an issue, and then the excessively wet conditions can be an issue to some extent. The drought issues is, we're watching that very carefully. We're seeing elevated beef cow slaughter numbers. That certainly indicates that we're probably moving some cows out of those drought areas. What we're not quite sure of yet and continuing to watch is whether or not that represents significant additional herd liquidation forced by the drought. Some of the elevated cow slaughter we're seeing right now could simply be sort of early culling, which is kind of what we would tell producers to do. If forage is short, you might make those decisions earlier in the year, and they would have happened anyway, but just at a different time of the year. On the other hand, if it persists in the coming weeks, and we continue to see this, then it probably indicates that we are, in fact, fact, liquidating cows. That has some short-run implications, potentially, but probably more important are the longer-run implications in that we may just see an industry that's, a little bit smaller from a kind of a cyclical standpoint for 2022 and 2023.
Okay, let's move over to beef demand. You recently wrote a piece talking about how demand is looking to stay strong into the second half of 2021. What are the factors behind that?
Well, I think, in general, there's just an awful lot of, sort of pent-up demand on the part of consumers. I think it relates to the opening of the economy, getting the food service sector back online. Now, some of the increase we've seen in the first half of the year, I think, was sort of pipeline or inventory rebuilding in that food service sector. They had to get a lot of freezers and cold storage filled up back of house, and so that's probably mostly done. That cools it off, and we've seen the box beef price come down in the last few weeks, but that's from a higher level than we ever really expected to go up in the first place. So going forward, I still think we will see strong demand based on both food service and retail grocery demand continuing strong, and the exports play into that a bit as well, and those are looking very strong right now.
So the boxed beef that you mentioned, do you see what's happening there as more of just a correction then?
I really do. I think it reflects a temporary thing. I certainly don't think it represents a sort of an unraveling of demand at this point. I think it reflects, again, those pipeline stocks probably have gotten largely refilled at this point. And the other part of it is just the timing. A lot of that, the peak in boxed beef prices coincided with buying for 4th of July weekend. There's always a little bit of a earliness to that, and we got that done. We're past 4th of July now. We typically see seasonally beef demand back off just a little bit through the heat of the summer, and then we'll have another run a little bit as we get towards Labor Day. So all of this, I think, just sort of reflects the market kind of getting back to sort of seasonal patterns at this point.
And Derrell, we also have the cattle inventory report in a couple of weeks. Could you give us a preview as to what we could see, or maybe some things that we can be looking for in that report?
You bet. I don't have specific numbers at this point. I haven't made specific estimates, but in general, given everything we've seen with heifer slaughter, with beef cow slaughter, I'm pretty sure this mid-year report is going to reflect that we have continued to pull cattle numbers down, and that continues a trend that we've actually seen since the peak in 2019. So I think we'll see that. One of the things that I will be watching for will be the feeder supply number that we calculate out of this report. And so it's not a direct number out of the report, but a calculation of the estimated feeder supply. And that's really kind of the key going forward to seeing these, feedlot situation improve with numbers coming down in that. And so that feeder supply number, to me, will be important. And of course, it will be also in this report our first look at the 2021 calf crop, which also should be a little bit smaller on a year-over-year basis.
What do you see as the big market movers for the second half of 2021?
I think the second half of the year is going to turn the corner and look significantly better than the first half of the year. We had lots of challenges that we kind of knew were there in the first half of the year, but feeder cattle markets, fed cattle markets, both should see some improvement. Calf markets, as we get towards through the third quarter, we'll see that improvement kick in. I'm not sure whether it's right away early in the third quarter or whether it's a little bit later, but certainly by the fourth quarter of the year, we're looking for year-over-year higher prices for really across the board for cattle markets. And I think, again, that's going to be a reflection of both an improving supply situation as well as continued strong demand, both domestically and internationally.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Newsom for a check of the grain markets. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get a hold of us on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Next up, you'll often hear how cattle production relates to global sustainability. Not too long ago, I spoke with Robin White of Virginia Tech's Department of Animal and Poultry Sciences. I started by getting some information from Virginia Tech's 2019 Global Agricultural Productivity Report. According to that study, ag productivity growth is increasing by 1.6%, but that may not be enough.
So the projections are based on our global population growth, and at this point we need to increase agricultural productivity to be able to meet the demand for that growing global population. And the preliminary results would suggest that we need to increase the rate of productivity to be able to meet that gap.
And where would you say growth is stronger and where is it weaker?
I think the GAP report itself and the team involved in that's probably the best resource for that. Certainly I can speak from the animal sector, and animal agriculture is highlighted as a really exciting area where we can start to improve environmental impact of livestock or of agricultural systems, and at the same time work toward this idea of feeding our growing global population.
Yeah, because a lot of that ties into sustainable beef production. What are some things that will be a big focus in the beef industry in the coming years?
That certainly depends on whether you're talking nationally or globally, but I think our beef production system here in the U.S. is going to try and continue our trends in improving productivity and developing the most environmentally friendly products that we can. Historical estimates suggest that the environmental impact of beef production in the U.S. has decreased dramatically as we've improved efficiency of our production systems, and I think moving forward that's a big emphasis that will continue to try and maintain that trend. Another thing that I think the beef industry is becoming more aware of is the need to communicate with people about excuse me, the environmental impact and the healthfulness of beef products, because our understanding in that area is evolving pretty quickly. And certainly the average consumer probably doesn't have the most up-to-date information.
And I believe you were quoted in an article, I found this interesting, where you said that if animal ag were to decrease, then the increases in the other areas may not, or still may not be that beneficial. So if you could explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so we have some work evaluating what would happen if we removed animal agriculture from the U.S. production system in terms of human edible nutrients and in terms of environmental impact. So what we see is, it should be fairly logical. If we remove animals from agriculture, we can then feed people the feed that animals currently consume. But when you do the math on that, the type of feed that animals currently consume is not the type of feed that most humans probably want or need. It tends to be high energy, low micronutrient food products. Whereas livestock products provide low energy, high micronutrient products. So livestock provide this opportunity to kind of condense micronutrients in low energy foodstuffs, which is a really important way to be able to obtain micronutrients in the human diet. The other important outcome of that investigation was related to how environmental impact of the production systems might change. So because of the kind of counterbalancing effects of a change in an agricultural ecosystem that's really evolved to have both crop and animal-based agriculture, we see on a national scale something like a 2.9% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions associated with removing animals from agriculture. That's probably a lot less than what we would infer based on the carbon footprint numbers thrown around for beef in particular.
And in your opinion, I think this answer can go in a million different directions, but say we're looking 50 years down the line, what do you think people are eating and what does that farm of the future look like to you?
You know, I will kind of hedge on that answer a little bit based on the fact that humans are omnivores. And I think over time what we learn is that extremes in any direction are kind of negative in terms of our health. And I think human health will always be the primary driver of human diets. And so I would imagine we're going to move toward diets that our physiology can sustain. And so that's probably a diet that includes animal products, a diet that includes plant products, and a diet in moderation.
Great information there from Robin. Next up, the University of Nebraska continues to see strong growth and record enrollment in the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources. Universities, private and state colleges, and community colleges like Northeast Community College and Norfolk are investing millions of dollars into facilities and programming for the influx of students interested in following career paths in agriculture. The reason for these investments is clear. Ag students are among the most wanted to fill positions among their families on the home farm or ranch, and also in the ag industry as a whole. You can read all about the demand for ag students in the July issue of Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Al Dutcher. And Al, hope you've had a good week. What are you tracking out there with the forecast?
Well, Troy, yes, it did survive the great 4th of July weekend. No major explosions of any consequence in my neighborhood. I hope everybody had a safe 4th of July. We did see a cool down, of course, as the models were indicating, and then we've seen the warmer temperatures move in, particularly across western Nebraska as we got into the midweek period, and then that slowly moved its way into eastern Nebraska. We also dealt with some periodic thunderstorm activity. A lot of it was isolated up till the middle of the week, and then we did see that cold front come through, and we're still dealing with some of the repercussions of that this morning. As we go forward in time, there are some concerns in regards to heat. It looks like as we get out past next weekend, we may be looking at another event, sort of like what we've seen in the middle of June, where we've seen temperatures pushing up in that 100-degree range. But before then, we're going to have to deal with several waves in a northwest flow that's going to rotate around the low that's responsible for our precipitation this last 24 hours. And that creates kind of an uncertainty going forward. But more importantly, before we get to the main forecast, I want to get you up to date on the latest drought monitor. And if we look at the latest drought monitor, the one thing I'll draw your attention to is that we do have some pretty significant conditions of dryness up in northern and northeastern Nebraska. And this has been persistent all spring. Did not get the moisture during the winter period that we've seen to the south of the Platte River. We also see some short-term dryness that started to materialize in the Fairbury over to the Hebron area. And we also deal with short and long-term dryness in the Panhandle. And that is a concern where the more of the heat has been and the less of the precipitation coverage with these warm temperatures coming possibly as early as next weekend. We're really going to have to pay attention to see whether or not this region really degrades much as we go through these next 2 weeks. Now, as we look at the upper air models, a trough that was responsible for our precipitation in the upper atmosphere is now swinging over central Iowa. We're kind of in a northerly to northwesterly flow across the eastern 2/3 of the state. There is a surface low in northeastern portions of Oklahoma that is bringing moisture up into this frontal boundary. So the main concentration of precipitation is going to be over the southern 2/3 of Iowa. And as we go into tomorrow, it looks like this low pressure system will cut off. We kind of mentioned that last week, that there was evidence of that. Surface low sits over in southern portions of Illinois. That's going to bring that Gulf moisture up in to feed this system. So we're going to see widespread moisture from essentially northern Louisiana all the way up into the eastern Corn Belt. And by Monday, we don't see very little movement in regards to the system. So that low pressure at the surface is over in eastern Iowa. We'll get some moisture wrap around, and we'll also get some waves of energy moving in through the northern plains that may generate a few isolated thunderstorms, particularly during the late afternoon overnight hours. And as we get into Tuesday, we see a kind of a northwest flow with a high pressure to our southwest and several ripples that we'll deal with throughout the week, particularly in the eastern 2/3 of the state, that might touch off some convection during the afternoon. So we kind of see this Tuesday afternoon that there is some signs that maybe some convection over northeastern and eastern Nebraska. By the time we get to Wednesday, another trough tries to strengthen as it moves toward the Great Lakes. That's going to drive another trough through the state, keep our temperatures basically cooling back down into more seasonal across the eastern part of the state. And once again, we deal with a scattered thunderstorm activity. Now, as we get into the day on Thursday, we see another couple ripples that'll move with this trough, kind of move toward the central and eastern Corn Belt. That once again gives us a chance for some scattered thunderstorm activity across the state as high pressure is more firmly in control over the central Rockies, kind of see by the models. But the main concentration of moisture is going to be eastern Iowa and points off to the east. Now, as we get into Friday, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. We get another wave that's going to move through the central Corn Belt. So eastern Nebraska is going to remain more on the normal to slightly cool side, but the heat is going to start to return in earnest across western Nebraska. You kind of see from the flow of the thunderstorms it's going to be on the front side of this ridge. More concerning is that ridge is going to start to build in next weekend and may actually bring us on 100-degree temperatures the following week into at least the western half of the state. So we looked at 8 to 14-day forecast. It's taking us next Thursday through the following Tuesday. We'll have normal temperatures with that heat coming in and below normal precipitation, which we would expect under high pressure aloft.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, we want to tell you about a few upcoming events. The Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition is excited to announce their 2021 Nebraska Grazing Conference. The event is in just a few weeks, and Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has more.
The Nebraska Grazing Conference is entering its 21st year and is ready to meet again this fall.
We work with UNL, Center for Grassland Studies, to put on what's known as the Nebraska Grazing Conference. It's going to be held at the Eunice Center in Kearney, Nebraska.
The conference will take place August 9th through August 11th of 2021. This year, discussions and presentations will focus on grazing and wetland health.
This year, that program is focused on grazing management impact on wetlands, habitat health, grazing management for wetlands. So it's somewhat of a unique twist. Because, I mean, historically, with most of the wetlands being in Nebraska sandhills, the traditional production model has been to strictly hay those wetlands. we have more producers that are now interested in grazing those wetlands intensively.
New to this year's conference is the opportunity for high school and college students to learn more about the degrees and grassland systems UNL has to offer via a special session. For more information or to register for this year's conference, go to grassland.unl.edu/Nebraska-Grazing-Conference. Registration is due July 30th.
Next, the Youth Crop Scouting Competition is a chance for Nebraska youth to showcase some of their agronomy skills in a competitive manner. The participants will work in teams and go into the field to scout and diagnose potential problems. This is a great opportunity for youth to learn more about agriculture and the careers it can offer.
And this program is important so that youth can learn more about the agronomy area and even learning more about entomology, pathology, and the hopes is that we'll have some of these youth get into agronomy related careers and stay within Nebraska.
Everything takes place at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center near Meade on August 3rd. Registration is due by July 15th. We've got a link with more information and how to register on the Market Journal website. And lastly, the 4 R's of Nutrient Stewardship Field Day is set for July 15th. It will feature speakers from UNL's Natural Resource Districts and National Resources Conservation Service who will be sharing knowledge and tools to improve nutrient management, soil health, crop yields, and water quality. Organizers say this is a great opportunity for producers to learn about the 4 R's strategy to improve crop yield and profits while protecting the environment. This event takes place also at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center. It's a free event, but you'll need to register beforehand. You can find more information on this also on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, with solar development expanding in Nebraska, our expert is back to give some insight into the finer details associated with leasing land for solar development. Plus, Darren Newsom will be here to discuss the grain markets. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.